Hello, everyone. I hope you're safe and well. My name is Aya Shebi. I'm the African Union Youth Envoy. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the final public webinar of our series of the Virtual African Union Youth Consultation Series on COVID-19 for a collective youth response. As part of my role to bring African youth closer to the African Union every Wednesday for the past 2 months at 2 p.m. Addis Ababa,
I would come and do the volume.
I hosted
I can't hear her. Oh.
different speakers on the webinar series, and now we come to the end. So you have engaged directly, you have asked your questions, and I'd like to remind many people who have been following us or who have joined us for the first time that the format of the series is to have decision makers as guests to be challenged by young people. So you ask your questions and they answer your questions, and then you engage with them directly. So I want to also ask you to ask your questions on the Q&A. So you can click on the bottom of your page and click on Q&A to do that. The webinar will be in English, but you can also ask your question in Arabic and French. Le programme sera en anglais, mais vous pouvez poser vos questions en français. سيكون البرنامج باللغة الإنجليزية ولكن يمكن طرح أسئلتكم أيضا باللغة العربية. We will also have interpreters to French. So thanks to Mubarak from Burkina Faso and André from Benin, who will run with us throughout these 2 hours. Si vous êtes francophone, cliquez sur Interprétation dans les options et sélectionnez Français. Also, out of this engagement, we have developed a roadmap, so you can check out on auyouth-envoy.org/webinars, auyouth-envoy.org/webinars. You will find there a recap video of all the youth intervention and pre-webinar forums, and you can contribute by filling a form at the end of the page on thematic areas that we discussed. This final one is a special edition. We will be talking about African and global solidarity. And I see that we had already our Zoom sold out with 1,000 capacity. So I hope many of you will join the Zoom. But if you can't, or if your friends cannot, please go on a Youth Envoy Facebook page. We are now live. We are also be running polls throughout the webinar, so please do participate. I see that my first guest joined us, Professor Maluka. I'm so honored to have you, the Chief of African Peer Review Mechanism, the CEO of APRM. How are you, Prof?
Good morning, my sister. How are you? I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, we are really happy to have you with us as well. So to kick us off, Professor, I know that on Monday you launched Africa's Governance Response to COVID-19 report, which we also shared on our platforms. So a question from young people is, what are the mechanisms of implementation? What are the monitoring and evaluation of these recommendations on the report? But also, what does the report provide in terms of impact on African youth?
Look, I think we look at, we did this as a preliminary study because, of course, we can't go to countries. So we worked through a task force of 15 of our member states and a number of experts on the African continent. We looked at mainly, you could say, 4 or 3 things. We look at responses at national level. We also looked at responses at the regional level, and then the global context, and then the African innovations. You could say 4 areas. So in terms of the regional level, of course, is the African Union and the regional economic communities. At the national level, we looked at 4 things. We look at what you can call the political or legal and institutional measures that states have undertaken to respond to this pandemic. We looked at the humanitarian and support measures, and then we look at disease prevention measures in place, and then finally the economic issues, the fiscal and monetary issues. Clearly around the youth, the issue that affects the youth around political and institutional or legal issues is the question of youth participation. Youth participation in the civic life of society, youth participation, and how what you are saying there is that we are encouraging the African Union to assist African countries to find a balance between the imperatives imposed on countries by this pandemic, which affect the participation of people in politics and so on, and also of course, the need to prevent the disease, that it shouldn't be at the expense of the vibrant life life that we have here on the African continent, political life of our continent. The humanitarian issues clearly support for the youth. Some countries were able to deploy some resources to support their youth, but other countries are struggling. A lot of our youth have lost jobs, have lost their livelihood, have lost their income. And then the third one, of course, is the issues around disease, the prevention of the disease. So there, the youth have an important role to play in awareness, reaching out, and also as development workers reaching out, going to communities, as also being part of the health workers who are in the front line of our offensive and response to this pandemic. And finally, the issues about the economic empowerment. And there the youth, as you know, that post this pandemic, a lot of our youth are going to need very strong support in terms of in the economic sphere to support and to empower them to be able to set up, or those who are in business who had gone down to come out there. So the issues really that we can do with you on this thing is to develop a mechanism and work with the Department of Social Affairs in Addis Ababa on what is it that we need to do now to provide support and also provide even guidelines to countries in how they can implement the recommendations that come out of this report.
Absolutely, absolutely. And congratulations on the launch. And we encourage everyone to go to APRM platforms to also see the different tweets on the different aspects of the report. So when I joined you, Prof, in Chad for the first APRM International Youth Symposium last year in July, we were talking about the APRM Youth Network, the Youth Desk, the youth chapters to be part of national monitoring mechanisms. How far are we with these plans, especially in engaging youth-led accountability during COVID-19?
No, well, let me say that at least we have done a lot of work since then. The first thing is that the youth network has been operationalized. As you know, it's headed by our young brother, Musa Kondo, who lives in Mali. He's quite active also on your platforms. The youth network operates, and they have met several times. And now we are in the process of developing an APRM youth strategy. But remember that we don't have a youth mandate. The youth mandate in the African Union resides with the Commission. And we now have, we signed an MOU with the Department of Social Affairs at the African Union Commission, where we can supplement and complement their work. Our interest in youth issues, not that we are not interested at all in other areas, but our specific APRM interest is really to ensure that in the APRM exercises, in the review missions, there is a very strong youth participation. So when we consult, when we send our teams, when they talk to people in countries, when authorities consult their people, that there's a very strong youth voice in APRM processes. And then secondly, we are in the process of developing a youth-specific review tool. And had it not been for this COVID-19, we would have by now had our own experts meeting with the youth. We have started some work already. So we need a youth-specific APRM tool. And you know that last year, we conducted a youth-specific review of youth empowerment, youth-related issues in Namibia. We have a report on youth issues, youth unemployment in Namibia, which was presented to the meeting of the presidents of APRM in February in Addis Ababa by the president of Namibia. So now we are going to be working with the Namibians on the implementation of that report. We are affected by this COVID-19. We tried to do it virtually, it didn't work. But really, since then, we have done quite a lot of work, and we intend to go then to a number of countries and do youth-specific and produce youth-specific reports for as many countries as possible on our continent. And then, of course, the follow-up is quite key to ensure that we implement and work with countries in the implementation of the recommendations.
That's great to hear. And I also heard that you have 30% staff, that you reached that because we have that ambition in the African Union. So follow your leads and all, AU affiliates and departments. So there is a question coming from young people here. If I can summarize it, it's about governance. This pandemic, it's not just a health crisis, but a governance crisis. How can we transform our governance out of this crisis to deliver for young people and to have citizen engagement, youth engagement, and leadership in public service?
Like I said to you, the issue for me around governance is issue of participation. We encourage our leaders that the measures that they impose or we impose on our countries should not affect the vibrancy and the openness of our own societies. It's very, very, very important. And it must be done within the rule. And then I say, oh, I'm closing this, I'm closing that. is different from if you say, I have a law which allows me to do this and that. So it has to be done within the rule of law. So we encourage that our governments, of course, it's inevitable that they will take this to be done within the framework of the law, and people must be, if they are dissatisfied, must be able to go to the courts to challenge. It must be done within the framework of participation and the vibrant life, political life that we have in many of our countries. So for us, it's very important. And we're also happy that even though some people think that African countries are postponing elections, it's not true. It's only, I think, one or two countries that have done so. We know that Burundi has just had its election. As far as I know, in the report, I think by the time we did the report, it was only Ethiopia which had postponed the election. But as to other countries, they are all on schedule. So it's important for the youth out there in those countries to participate, to ensure that they participate in the political lives of their own countries and contribute to the determination of the leadership there. And we encourage, of course, the leaders that it's time also, of course, in this to realize and many of our leaders do say so. The creation, you have yourself, the youth envoy. We have also a chairperson here of the APRM Youth Network. So there's now, you could say, growing realization on the continent that youth are young in terms of age, but they are not young in terms of their wisdom, in terms of the energy they bring into our society. So it's important for the youth out there to participate and to be involved, and also to feel part of the efforts that are going within countries. But the openness of our own societies must not be a victim of the measures that are being implemented by our own leaders.
Thank you for that recognition to many young people. I hope many young people would interact with that and tell us what do they think of the leadership of APRM. It's important to have someone on the top of this institution who believe in the participation of young people. So saying that, I want to bring a young person on board to the discussion. He is from DRC, and so DRC is a member of APRM, Democratic Republic of.
Not yet. But President Tshisekedi said that he's ready. So I'll be going to DRC once they have lifted the restrictions on movement. But the president has already said to me that DRC is ready to join. So we hope DRC will join in at the summit.
We have the commitment, and we need to make it happen. So I'd like to bring on board Baganda, who comes from Africa Asia Youth Foundation. You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Aye. Hello.
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. I take this opportunity, first of all, to thank the APRM for the work they've been doing to improve good governance across in Africa. In Africa, we come from far in this domain. My name is Crispin Baganda. I'm from DR Congo. I'm an engineer, a leader, and an astute promoter of youth. Over the past 5 to 7 years, I've been involved with different youth organizations, both on national and international level. More recently, I opened a youth center due to high unemployment rate among youth in my near surrounding. I opened a youth center, Boresha Life, where young people learn.
Where is the youth center? Is it in Kinshasa?
No, it's not in Kinshasa. It is in the east part, South Kivu.
Oh yeah, I know the area. I've been there, yes.
Oh, you are welcome once again. Yes, so in the youth center, where youth learn different skills, notably computer skills, among many others. So with the COVID-19 in our walls, we try to partner with different labs across the country to make local washing machine, and also through digital campaign to advertise for young people to maintain and to see how we can halt the spread of the COVID-19. So right now, as an engineer, I believe now more than ever that technology has a big part to play in the sustainable growth of Africa, and also it is an important aspect to build a global youth solidarity. So my question to Professor Obed is, what are the measures, or what measure did the APRM take to work with government in including technology in governance, also engaging existing innovation of young people like myself to be recognized and to work in national plan in governments?
Professor, over to you.
No, let me congratulate my brother Crispin, and also say how proud I am to meet a young African engineer, and also I'm impressed by the work that you are doing in that beautiful part of the DRC. I love South Kivu. It's so beautiful. And the question that you are raising, really, my brother, about the role of the APRM. What we have a network of countries which is co-chaired by Uganda and South Africa, where countries share experience on national planning. Because you know that, I'm not sure about the DRC, but many African countries over the last few years have developed national development plans, vision, and so on and so on. So we have brought them together under one umbrella where they share experiences. But what was the challenge which has really been exposed by this pandemic is that Africans were planning for a perfect future. We are planning for a desirable future. We didn't do enough to plan for a disaster. So we have a decision that we have taken to our policy organs now to try to bring together these ministers to see how we can now strengthen the disaster preparedness component in our own national planning. And that's really the role that's going to be played by engineers, because disaster management, of course, it involves a lot of social engineering, but you are also in the front line of innovation. One thing that has come out very clear out of this is that Africans, everybody's talking about vaccines, and everybody's talking about the testing kit, but all of them come from elsewhere but Africa. Now we know in Senegal, now the Senegalese, they've been doing a lot of work developing their own testing kits. In Ghana, there's a lot of work. We are also impressed by the work that the contribution of Madagascar in this regard with this help. So the big challenge really facing the youth on the technology front, the innovation front, the engineering front, is to try to come with our own technologies that must be able to respond and help us deal with African challenges. Planning is one thing. We can have ministers of planning, but if we don't have the tools on the ground, the machines and the boots on the ground, it's just plans, it's just good ideas. So we really depend on your entity, your own NGO, that you need really to capacitate and work with your authorities, capacitate your local areas, your municipalities, your regions, your states, to be able to develop capacity for technological innovation at the local level that responds to local challenges. But African technology should not mean inferior and second grade and substandard. It must be able to be of top and high quality. And that's very, so Africa, something African should not mean is something of poor quality. So we should be able to develop technologies and innovative solutions that are adapted and responding to our own situation, but it should not mean they should be substandard. So I'm very, very happy with the work that we are doing. We will do our best to follow up with you, and perhaps when you are in the DRC and coming to launch the APRM, inshallah, you will be there and you will come and join us, my brother.
Inshallah. And I want, before we close with your call to action, Prof, I want to push you a little bit further. So, you know, young people have already all the innovation. They have the ideas, they run it with very little resources, they come up with all these ideas, but it's not recognized by their authorities and their member states. How can we push through your leadership to institutionalize that, to certify, give certificates to young people who have verified their prototypes and it's proven to work? And let them, you know, expand the market. How can we make these innovations really become a part of national strategies and part of policies, and translate what the government is trying to do, instead of asking young people all the time to, you know, innovate and bring your ideas, bring your creativity, and when they do, they find themselves in a vicious circle.
No, definitely. I think it's an important thing, and I'm happy you have raised that point. So in this tool that we are developing, we really need to make a very visible or strong provision in this tool to make sure that in our own reports we reflect that innovations by the youth and so on. And we hope that yourself, you will join us when we launch the Namibia report. I think we have already written to you. We have also written to the Social Affairs Commissioner. But remember, the lead agency on youth issues is the Department of Social Affairs in the African Union and yourself. So we are ready to partner with you. I think you really need, like you are doing now, and to work with the Department of Social Affairs to really, you could have an initiative at the continental level where you really unearth this talent that is there, out there in our countries, in the area of innovation, unearth it, give it recognition. The more you do that from your level and also the Department of Social Affairs, the more the recognition will be given by our leaders to the initiatives that are coming within their own countries. We at the APRM level, we've got APRM national offices. We have heard this message, and we are going to make sure that in this tool that we are developing, to involve the youth in the APR is something we had not done. We had done, but it was not that much strong. But now it's something that this year we're saying, since last year actually, we want to make sure that there's a very strong youth voice in the APRM processes, but also in the APRM report. But what we are saying is that we must make sure that there is a strong element, or there's an emphasis, a strong emphasis on innovation and youth innovations in the work that we are doing with our own countries, and we'll convey that message. But the lead has to be taken by you, my sister, the youth envoy, and the Department of Social Affairs. We stand ready to support you, and this is a noble thing to do, and it's something that should be done for the youth of our continent.
Thank you, Professor. I mean, we're here to co-lead with you. It's with co-leadership.
Thank you very much.
Young people.
Thank you very much.
So we want to end with a powerful call to action from you and a commitment as the CEO of APRM, which I think you already committed, so you can take us from that.
No, definitely. For us, we are quite ready. We're going to launch the Namibia report. We're going to cascade the work on that we did in Namibia to other countries. You're going to see more youth. We are doing the reviews of Nigeria this year. We are doing South Africa, inshallah. We are doing Niger. And we are also doing Ghana, if they will still come back onto the table. So in all these reviews that we are going to be doing this year, there is going to be a very, very strong youth participation in this. And we are going to encourage our countries that in this APRM reports that we have a standalone chapter on youth issues to showcase the work you are doing, but also to look at, also take a good look at the challenges facing your own country and what is it that you need to do to address these challenges. And of course, the issues of follow-up and implementation for us are quite key. So we really look forward to working with the youth in these countries that we'll be reviewing this year. And we of course, also look forward to a very strong and active partnership with your office, my sister.
Thank you very much for your commitment. I think this crisis proved that we need youth and governance to innovate and to occupy leadership and bring their creativity and digitalize our traditional bureaucratic institutions. I want to thank Lennon and Julia and the entire team at APRM for the wonderful work they're doing. Thank you, Professor Eddie Maloka.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and congratulations for an exciting program. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So I've seen so many people on the chat box asking for fixing the interpretation. The interpretation is there, it's working. All you need to do is to click on the bottom of interpretation and choose the language, and then click off the original audio. So I want now to welcome my next guest, who is the first female Secretary General of the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, COMESA, Madame Kapwepwe. I want to first thank the African Governance Architecture, AGA Secretariat, especially Magda, for facilitating your participation on the webinar as a continuous collaboration between the African Union and regional economic communities. And I want to also thank Ambassador Matata, the head of COMESA Liaison Office with the African Union, for always being a champion of the youth agenda. And I look forward to hearing from you, SG, on your perspective on youth as Secretary General of COMESA. So how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to be part of this very important engagement with the youth of Africa. As you know, COMESA is the largest REC on the continent with 21 member states, all the way from Tunisia all the way down to Eswatini. So we have a large footprint with over 560 million people, the majority of which are the youth. So for us, it's a very important aspect of the work that we do. And youth empowerment is part of our treaty. So it's on a provision that we have to engage the youth and find out how we can support them.
Absolutely.
In the sense of
So I wanted first to ask this question coming from young people on how has COMESA been responding to the pandemic? How does it engage young people in the region, especially youth unemployment and economic recovery? As I think COMESA, mandate includes also economic integration.
Yes, as rightly been pointed out, the youth have really been impacted in the sense of job losses, even disruption to training with closures of institutions of learning and so on. So what we have done so far is to engage the youth with for example, very basic issues like just to give them information on what measures have been put in place, which are likely to disrupt their normal activities in trade. And for example, we have a COMESA WhatsApp group for youth, so they can find out exactly what the restrictions are and how they will not be able to trade in certain areas because of the pandemic. But we're also now trying to support them in other areas, like before the pandemic, we're able to do like workshops where we have a boot camp for youth where they come together and we try to build the capacity for them to engage in the social and economic development of their own countries. So we are doing that through capacity building, and with this pandemic in place, we're now going to have to look at how can we do this, continue doing this even if it's virtually, so that we still support the youth in what they're doing. We're also looking at developing a COMESA youth engagement strategy. We're doing this in collaboration with the AU and with the support of the Swiss Agency of Development, because we want to have an engagement strategy that is targeted, that is focused, so that we recognize what are the areas that we really need to engage the youth, instead of just having a sort of a prescriptive criteria for engagement. So that is very important. But maybe to just on the issue of economic activity and trade, the issue of technology is now going to come to the fore. It will not be a nice to have. It will be a way of doing business. So we're looking at how do we upscale digital solutions in the way that we do. One of the areas we've looked at is supporting innovation. We have been this anywhere through research forums. So we call for ideas, business ideas from the youth to see how we can support them to move from an idea into a business. We're also looking at issues like virtual learning. We have been developing a virtual master degree program in economics with specific focus on regional integration, which we are doing, rolling out with the collaboration of all our member states, selected universities in our member states, so that even in this condition, they can still access learning, they can still follow the programs that can support them into remaining active in the trade space.
SG, I think you are doing amazing work at COMESA. And I joined this year the steering committee of AGA COMESA joint program, the bootcamp that you've been talking about, which I was really impressed about. But how is this project now adjusting to COVID-19? How it will be scaled up to engage youth post-coronavirus?
Yes, in fact, coronavirus in a way has pushed us to have to be able to interact on a much larger scale than would have been if we're actually having physical meetings. So I think this is an opportunity for us to now upscale that capacity building to further interaction, to more feedback, to monitoring what the actual result of what we're doing is. And I think using technology will be able to do a lot more going forward. We're very excited with the opportunity to be able to engage
Maybe
the youth.
Maybe we have a virtual bootcamp?
Yes, that's a possibility, and because the youth have a natural affinity to technology, they're comfortable using these kind of meetings as setup. So we hope that we can even take advantage and reach even more youth than we've been able to do before this.
So my other question before we bring as actually a young person from COMESA region to also engage with you is I know that you have a division dedicated to gender and social affairs. Do you think we will have a division dedicated to youth or the desk, youth desk?
Yes, well, I think the main focus is what I said in the beginning, that youth empowerment is actually a clause in our treaty. which means it's one of the objectives of COMESA. So with the issues around youth, of course, becoming more topical, I'm sure these are areas which can be developed, and with the ability now to even reach more youth through this kind of platform, through virtual training, through innovation and supporting innovation, I think this is an area that we can really clearly look at.
All right, so I want to bring in Jacob from Uganda, who is member of the African Youth Front on Coronavirus, which is a framework that the African Union created for young people to co-lead the response to the pandemic, but he's also a member of the East Africa Community Youth Ambassadors Platform. So Jacob, you have the floor.
Thank you, Aya. Thank you, Madam Secretary General. Very elaborative efforts from COMESA there. So first of all, as the East African Youth Ambassadors Platform, we have been feeding into policy frameworks at the Secretariat level to ensure that young people are able to engage in policy formulation, but also ensure that the policies that come from regional blocks are representative of the interests of young people and cater for their vulnerability in times such as the pandemic or areas such as trade where unemployment is very large for young people. So with regard to COMESA particularly, how do you think, Madam Secretary General, that we can have regional blocks engage in initiatives that would compel specific action to young people's businesses to be sustained? Some COMESA countries like Kenya have developed stimulus packages, but these do not fit into the particularity of sectors like the informal sector, like the creative arts sector, where young people are in a majority. So how can we actually have regional blocks contribute to initiatives that are that specific and respond to the necessity of young people, do you think? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that very, I think, important question. And I think in my earlier articulation, I did talk about, we were formulating a youth engagement strategy. And I think it's important when we are looking for solutions and how do we engage and which areas should we look at, that it's important that we have a very clear framework of, especially you're bringing up some areas which maybe have been overlooked because maybe the engagement picked on, the well-known areas that we think of when we think of trade. For example, maybe not thinking of the arts and that creativity that can also be supported. So I think this type of engagement to start with is a very good starting point, so that we have a clear framework of the areas that we want to follow and to support, and also that it is a coordinated, harmonized approach. And I think that's the vantage point of a regional economic community, is that we can bring the members together and sit around the proposals and say, is this doable, so that we're all doing it at the same level in each member state. So I think first of all, recognizing the areas where we need to engage the youth, because we might assume a lot of things that we don't know that you would be interested in doing. And secondly, I think very importantly, to unpack. We talk a lot about supporting the youth in a sort of a generic form. So part of the unpacking is also this very clear engagement and clear framework, so that our efforts then are targeted and the results are known and we can monitor what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much, Jacob. If you have no further questions.
Now, I could just ask one more question to the ambassador. Part of COMESA's work has been to ensure that the COMESA countries engage in democratic activity that is both inclusive, but also monitored to be inclusive and democratic. Some of the COMESA countries are having a timetable now of electoral practice and democratic elections. Burundi has just come out of one. So as COMESA and as multiple regional blocks around the continent, is there a way that regional blocks can contribute to the democratic principles of elections that are held within a community?
Yes, thank you for that question. We do actually have a unit within COMESA, which is looking at governance, peace, and security, and they are involved in engaging our member countries not only at election time in terms of observing elections, but also in issues around governance, conflict management, so that we support the systems not only at the time of you are going to make a decision in the form of the election, but you support the structures themselves. I think that the challenge that Africa has in most cases is the need for strong institutions, so that you have institutions, whether it's electoral commission which oversees your election processes. I think that the support should really come to build strong institutions which can stand, any change or any test that comes to a country. So I think for us, the focus should be that let's support countries to have good, strong institutions, good frameworks that are in place, so that when we interact, doesn't matter who the players are, the institutions and the frameworks can stand up and therefore support countries to go through these elections without a lot of complaints and feedback to say maybe we don't think it was fair. We really have to build up those institutions and strengthen them.
Absolutely. So I hope, Jacob, questions were answered. And my last two questions before we take your call to action, SG, is regarding, how are youth integrated in COMESA structures? So we had just a guest before who is the CEO of APRM, who reached 35% as young people in the structure of APRM, employed in the capacity of APRM. So how is COMESA doing that? Do you have like a percentage for youth employees or staff? Do you have, I'm sure you have youth volunteers, but is there any structure like a youth network or youth employees, or, I'm sure many young people want to join COMESA, want to join the cause and serve, COMESA's mandate as well.
Yes, thank you for that question. We do have a distinction in terms of gender, but I will not be able to give you the youth brackets, just only to say that I'm not in the youth bracket, but that we really that we really want to engage the youth, because when I talk about COMESA's going forward, using technology as really the base for us to anything that we do, whether it's trade facilitation, whether it's investment promotion, that technology should be the basis. That already calls for the youth participation, because we find that in that space, the youth are the ones who are leading, the youth are the ones who are innovating, the youth are the ones who are in these jobs, which if we had to do a program tomorrow and it's talking about setting up a new platform, for example, for e-commerce, I can assure you a lot of the participants will be youth. So I think by just the nature of the things that we're doing now, we are employing a lot of youth, and we look forward to engaging.
You're reaching a lot of young people, that's true. So can we take a commitment from you as the SG of COMESA that you will commit to reach the 35% of youth as employees in COMESA?
I can commit, and I will do a very quick check after this to make sure that we're on course, but I'm quite confident that we have a lot of youth in our institution. But maybe for what I can really commit in terms of going forward is that we will continue to generate opportunities for youth as we roll out our trade solutions, our trade facilitation, so that they have the participation. And also to support them, I think there's always a case of they must innovate. But we want to start, for example, unpacking this to mean, for example, do they need support in, say, intellectual property rights? If they have an idea, how do they make sure they got that idea? How develop it? Do they develop it? And we're in conjunction with other global entities looking at how we can support the youth pro bono to try and support them to actually look at things like intellectual property rights. So we are thinking unpacking as opposed to just a generic, let's support them to be innovative. So unpack them to have to develop the prototypes or the business that they're doing, to have incubation opportunity, and also then to link them into the market so that they will have a market for the goods that they're doing.
Also some resourcing support, right?
Yes, and some resourcing support, incubation, training, and capacity building.
That's fantastic. So I want to end with you with a powerful call to action from you to all the young people who have been watching us now, about 300 here, but also 1,000 on Facebook Live. So this is your moment as our leader in COMESA to tell us your call to action.
Call to action, simply participate. Be part of the solution, whether it's a COVID response in your own community, in your institution, participate in the governance structures of your country. So participate. As I said, don't come to the table, but don't be just the menu. Be part of the people who are talking about what needs to be sorted out.
Thank you.
As for me, participate.
Thank you very much. Is there any other thing that we haven't covered that you'd like to share about COMESA work?
Yes, I think, as I said, going forward, our work will also move around connectivity, because if we're going to talk virtual markets, the e-platform, e-commerce, e-logistics, everything based in a digital form, so we have to invest, call our countries to support them to invest in connectivity, in the infrastructure that will be able for a youth sitting anywhere in any member states, being able to communicate with another youth in another state to say, this is what I'm selling, these are the goods. Can I then, how do I get them to you and all that? So communication, connectivity, we want to invest in that so that we can really support the youth to take full advantage of their knowledge and improve on it and let them be the solution.
Absolutely. I like your emphasis and call on innovation and technology. And it was a pleasure to have you, Secretary General of COMESA. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Pleasure to be here, and this is a fantastic opportunity. Thank you.
All right, so in this webinar series, we hosted 3 commissioners, actually, Commissioner of Social Affairs, Commissioner of Human Resources, Science and Technology, Infrastructure and Energy. We hosted the Special Envoy on COVID. We hosted the Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, the Africa CDC Director and Human Rights Commissioner. And today, we also had the AU affiliates and regional economic communities perspective. So I think we did cover many of the AU decision-making bodies and affiliates. So I want now to move to a global perspective and also to our partners' perspectives and call to action and messages of solidarity. But before that, I'd like to play a video message from Serine, who is member of the AU Youth Advisory Council. The message will be in French, but there will be subtitle in English for you to follow.
Au-delà de la chute des barrières de toutes sortes, de la généralisation du marché, de la technologie et des systèmes de gouvernance, une des leçons tirées de la crise liée au Covid-19 est que le monde est plus que jamais une communauté de destin. Cette nature profonde qu'il incarne incite à l'érection de nouvelles paradigmes, donc naturellement à un effort commun et global, seul rempart pour un monde meilleur et fiable pour chacun de ses habitants. Bien de questions seront sans doute repensées, dont le chômage de masse et l'immigration. Et l'on bien de causes, dont la plus terrifiante reste le manque d'opportunités et d'espoir pour ces jeunes femmes, ces jeunes hommes, pourtant entreprenants, dynamiques et motivés. Il faut donc agir dans ce sens, et rapidement.
That was the message from Serine, and I would like at this moment to welcome His Excellency George Papandreou, former Prime Minister of Greece, currently serving as Member of Parliament. How are you and how is Greece coping?
Hello, Aya, very nice to, I'm in the Parliament right now, so you may be hearing some noises from the room nearby. The discussions, we're discussing education. We are now slightly opened up, basically quite well in flattening the curve. We had very few victims of this virus, and most of Greece is corona-free. However, opening up is a challenge, as in many, we of course welcome people to Greece, but of course there is this difficulty. I also hear that Africa has done quite well, and maybe we have to learn from Africa. Of course, Africa has had some very difficult experiences because of previous pandemics, such as Ebola, but others also. And but I think your lessons are something that we have to carefully look at in the developed world, where we think sometimes we are immune from these types of problems. But I think that is a wrong assessment. I have a few words to say, if you like, Aya, just as an introduction, which may be helpful, because Europe has gone through recently, in the last 10 years, 3 major crises. And the first one was a different type of pandemic. It was a financial one, which spread. But we, Greece, were the center of one of these when markets attacked us because of our debt. I saw that as an opportunity to change. However, there was not much solidarity from the European Union. We were finally able to get help in debt, in our debt issue from other members, but the conditions were very, very harsh. Austerity, difficulties, when I thought that we really had to look at the institutional changes. For example, Greece had a lot of corruption. So I had to bring in, through technology, more transparency. For example, e-prescriptions in health and medicine, where we were able to cut the cost by 50%. That's 3 billion euros a year, and that's as much as we make in property taxes. So fighting corruption, bringing in meritocracy, tax evasion, I felt was an opportunity for us to make changes during the crisis. But Europe still looked at us a little bit funny and said, well, Greece is to blame. They're these Southerners, they're the lazy people. Actually, we work more than anyone else, according to OECD and the European Union, more hours than anyone else. The second, of course, was the refugee crisis, many refugees. And again, Europe was not able to come together because, yes, there was 1 million, not only from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from some places in Africa also, where there are conflicts. However, Europe could have dealt with this together. It's not a large number for Europe. However, we fought amongst ourselves and were not able to deal with it in the right way. And that is much more contentious. And a lot of fear and racism developed in populism. This time, the pandemic, Europe woke up, I would say. There's greater solidarity, but it does show that Europe does have the capacity, and we are moving, hopefully, to a stronger Europe. And in investing both in the health system and dealing with the pandemic, we also want to invest for the future, which is actually a Green Deal. A Green Deal we need for the worker in our society, but also a new perspective in developing the new climate, dealing with the climate crisis, and therefore new types of research, new types of training, new types of jobs, and of course, a very different energy mix. But this pandemic, however, yes.
If I may,
yes,
I just want to really dive into what you were saying, because you touched on refugees, you touched on migration, you touched on leadership of Africa, and I want to dive into each one of them. And I want to start maybe where Cyrine left, because we just saw a video from a young person talking about, he lives actually in France, he's from Senegal, he lives in France, and he's talking about the migration debate. And we've seen that the labor migration has been temporarily suspended in some countries, while in others, migration processes and assistance to asylum seekers are being slowing down. Same way, refugees and persons displaced internally and across border are at risk during COVID-19 pandemic. So what is your thought on the current situation of African refugees in Europe within the COVID-19 context, and how the migration issue and protection of human rights should be addressed, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, we need to protect refugees. First of all, the ones that are on our continent. I have made very strong statements about the places, sometimes the camps where the refugees are, because they are much more vulnerable concerning COVID-19. On the wider issue, I believe that migration. We need to have a migration policy. We need migrants in Europe. That's my opinion. But we need to do it in an organized and regulated fashion. I myself have been a migrant, but I have also been a refugee. My father and my mother were refugees. My grandfather and grandmother were refugees. My great-grandfather was a refugee. So I have been this generations of living through difficult situations. I grew up during a dictatorship, and we had to leave and go to Sweden and Canada. But I believe that we have an opportunity to work together. Of course, the idea, so we have learned a lot, bringing together different cultures, different countries, based peoples, so their open markets, and some transfer of wealth, so that we can balance some of the inequities. However, this pandemic has really brought out some of the big problems we are facing, and it's global. These are global. One, of course, is the deep inequality, access to the health system, whether it's access to education, and particularly the access to the internet and to the quality distance learning, if you like. Also access to technology in general. And I think it's also an opportunity to say we need to make big changes. Going back to the old normal is not the solution. And I think that has been highlighted with this tragic event in the US with George Floyd, where why would we want, I mean, this has touched people throughout the world and has mobilized people throughout the world. Why would you want to go back to a system that is so racist, that is so unjust, that has created inequalities, where you see the African American community and other communities of color, minority communities, really hit by COVID-19 because they are either on the front line as workers, they have more difficult jobs, they don't have access to healthcare, they don't have the money to be able to help themselves.
Exactly.
This is the thing which we have seen
on that, Mr.
inside.
Because you said about the rise of populism in Europe with an increase of racism and threat to individual rights and freedoms, including our diaspora, our African diaspora in Europe affected by this. So how do you think, Ahmed, this movement, you know, which is, yes, it's happening in the US, but there is also racism in Europe. How do you think Europe is responding to that, or should respond or address this issue of racism and threat to individual rights as African diaspora?
We need to change the narrative. We need to fight against this narrative of fear, this politics of fear, and realize that we are a global community. Someone earlier said a common destiny. It showed that this COVID-19 has showed that we are all, you know, no matter what race, what class, what country, what ethnicity, we are all vulnerable human beings. That also shows a unity, and we need to build on that. Secondly, we need to see that diversity, with some basic principles, diversity is positive. It's positive for our societies, it's positive for growth, it's positive for innovation, it's positive for our economies. Thirdly, the diaspora needs to organize, but they also can be a major change agent, not only contributing to the country, their new country, whether it's in France or whether it's in the UK or whether it's in anywhere in Europe or anywhere around the world, but they can also be a strong force of change in their homeland, because they are, when you are in the diaspora, you know, you say, and I'm sure there are so many Africans that say this, hey, you know, why is this country doing this and in my country we can't do it? You know, we have nothing, we're smart, we're capable. So obviously the diaspora is an agent for change. And I see that Europe should invest in that. They should be investing in our refugees and in our migrants and in the African diaspora as an agent for change, both in our countries, but also in Africa too. Bringing this
So you spoke about the narrative.
How they can be used in the
Mr. Pavan, the connection in the parliament is very weak, so we want to get 2 more words from you before we wrap up. So my last question for you is about this narrative of questioning if Africa can cope or handle the crisis, a narrative as, you know, as incapable or in need of foreign assistance. How can Europe use this opportunity to go beyond the donor-recipient relationship with Africa?
I very much believe that the European Union can play a very important role. I don't know if you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Hello? Let me see. You can hear you, okay. The European Union needs to play a very important role with Africa, not imposing on Africa, helping the African Union, the African youth, the African countries find their own agency. Strengthening the African Union, I think, is the way. Strengthening the agency of Africans themselves is the way. There will be need for more aid, I agree, but it should not create more dependency. There will be need, very possibly, for debt relief. People have to be, many African countries will not be able to hold on to such big debt that may accrue because of the COVID-19. However, that should be combined with types of changes which I think many Africans have been fighting for, and I believe the youth of Africa also have been fighting for. Strong institutions, I heard that earlier from your speaker, resilient institutions, transparency, fighting corruption as we have tried to do in Greece, better governance. This is the democratic challenge. Participation of the youth to make these changes, this is the opportunity. Do not lose the COVID-19 opportunity, no matter how difficult it has become for all of us. It is also an opportunity to rethink, to change, and there will be changes. The question is, towards which direction? Are we going to strengthen the negative power structures that we have, or are we going to rethink them and create a much better type of power structure which listens to people, allows for participation, respects diversity, moves the country towards greater transparency and dealing with big crises such as climate crisis, but also Africa in its own agency. I think the European Union can also play a role with China and the US. Rather than competing in Africa, let's work together to help Africa in its decisions. You have to make the decisions. We should follow. Because I think Europe and Africa are close. We are natural partners. We need to work together, whether it's on migration or refugees, but we need to work together because you have the potential of this huge youth growth in Africa, which either will move towards a greater economic development and sustainable development in Africa, or we will see much greater pressure for migration from Africa, which will create more tensions between the European Union and Africa. Although I do,
Mr. Papandreou, I want to join you to say that we really need to move on into a world of equal partnership. So, as you said, all working together. So it's not also saving Africa or supporting Africa. Africa can also help the world because all the natural resources come from home, and we feed the world actually with our resources. So I want to end with you with your solidarity message. Thank you for sharing all your perspective and with a commitment from you as a global leader, because you're engaged in so many global platforms like the World Refugee Council and other platforms. So what is your commitment as a global leader to the youth agenda?
I very much believe in the younger generation. We are doing leadership training in Greece. We want to extend that and work with similar institutions such as yours, Aya, and with other youth organizations to strengthen the capacity for the younger generation to deal with these new challenges. But as you said, empowering them rather than creating more dependencies in solidarity with Africa. And that is, I think, in our historical, although Greece has not been a colonial power, but Europe, many countries have been, it is our historical responsibility and duty to really allow Africa and support Africa to build up its own agency, its own strengths. That would be best for Africans, it would be best for the world. And I'm sure you can do a great job. Be confident.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papandreou, for joining us today and taking time from your work at the Parliament. Go ahead and advocate for education. So we thank you and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Aya, and good luck. Best of success.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. So before I move to my next guest, I'd like to play a video from UN Women Executive Director.
Your Excellencies, African Union Youth Envoy Aya Chebi, and the global citizens of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate African and global solidarity in the midst of a global crisis. This year, we are also marking the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration. We are urging young people, the young people we call Generation Equality, to make sure that the unfulfilled promise of the Beijing Declaration will be fulfilled. The world is now focused on fighting the spread of coronavirus and saving lives. We are fighting an economic crisis. We are fighting the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence. We are fighting to save girls from dropping out of school, because after a long time of being at home, we are seeing a spike in child marriage, in trafficking, and in unplanned pregnancies. We have also seen the racial struggles that have flared up. And the young people in the US and young people everywhere have come out in large numbers to say enough is enough, even at the risk of exposing themselves to a virus. This is how brave our young people are. You have energy, you have creativity, you have solutions. Let us make sure that we leverage your creativity, your courage. I am calling upon leaders to support intergenerational and co-leadership in the fight for justice, in the fight to save our public health system, and in the fight to respond against COVID-19. As young leaders, we are urging you to remain woke, to focus on change that is transformative for today and for the future. As Frantz Fanon reminded us, every generation has a mission to fulfill or betray. I know you will not betray your mission. We can depend on the leaders you have, such as Aya Chebi. And I wish you good luck with this series of consultations on COVID-19.
All right, that was the message from Mama Phumzile. Thank you for your commitment to intergenerational co-leadership. And now I have the extreme pleasure and honor to welcome Her Excellency Joyce Banda, former President of Malawi. How are you, Madam President?
I'm fine. Nice to see you, Aya. You're looking beautiful.
Thank you so much. You are as well, as usual. So I want to, dive deep into the discussion with you. And I want to start from where UN Women ED message, as everyone is focusing on COVID-19 as a health crisis, the impact on young women is enormous. So what about the response to women's health, to issues of family planning, maternal mortality, malnutrition? How should governments address that? Because these are issues you deeply care about.
Yeah, first and foremost, let me take this opportunity, Aya, to congratulate you as a youth envoy and all the young people around the world that are working together this time and are highly committed to the issue of COVID-19. You have asked me, what is it that I see happening during this time of the COVID-19 in as far as the maternal health, family planning, issues of health are concerned? Maybe let me just share my concern during this time. I'm extremely concerned that as a global community, or as an African community, continental community, we may lose sight of the health challenges that we've always been grappling with. For example, maternal health, maternal mortality, tuberculosis, malaria, HIV/AIDS, hunger. So it is my appeal that I'm talking to a youth champion, that as we focus on the pandemic this time, it's a crisis, but we've also got other crises that we must not lose sight of. And I know that I'm giving you a heavy load, but I know that this is what you can handle. I say this because I insist always that the young people are not leaders of tomorrow. You are leaders of today. And this intergenerational discussion is key to making sure that you step in and take off from where we are. I believe that government should stay focused on the other diseases as well. If you look at statistics from the month of January to month of April, they are saying that globally, 2 million people have died of hunger. Over 350,000 people have died of malaria. But what is silent is that people are not very much talking about women's health. And I think that women's health is key, because not only are they vulnerable at this time, but they're also the receiving end of the consequences of the effects of the pandemic. For example, in places like Africa, where they've had a total shutdown, you find that in most of those countries, they build the capacity to support people during the shutdown. And it is in those societies where it is hand to mouth. Women will wake up today, go and sit in the market. What they sell today is the meal for today. And then they are told not to go out. I don't see mechanisms in those countries to ensure that women have food at home. Now, in countries where maternal mortality is high, where we've been fighting and made gains in reducing maternal mortality, now we see an increase, as Madam Pumizile just said, in domestic violence, in violence against women. And as a result of that, some of those are traditional practices when women are expecting babies, or having less food when women are expecting babies, or harmful traditions that deny women to eat some kinds of foods because we believe they are not good for women who are pregnant. Those are things we've been busy fighting. We've been in our women's networks, we've been going about sensitizing men and women and communities about what is best to do for women's health. Mm-hmm. Now we have abandoned all that. We are focusing on the pandemic. And that is what my concern is. So what governments needs to do in countries like Malawi is to engage local leadership, traditional leadership. That's what I did when I was head of state, by engaging traditional leaders who are the custodians of tradition and culture, and asking them to form committees to help communities to treat their women well, to build the capacity to buy bicycles, to make sure women get to the clinic when they are in labor. To do that the same now with the pandemic. Use the same chiefs, leaders, traditional leaders, opinion leaders as change agents. To use the same ones as the custodians of tradition to sensitize communities to the pandemic as well as family planning. My fear is that we will get to a point where we are focusing on the pandemic and then we ignore all others, and the consequences will be dire, and then we'll be back to square one. We will have lost the gains that we have made. So governments need to be alert.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing also your experience and best practice in Malawi. So I really want to go to this question from young people, because Your Excellency always remind us that in many platforms that leadership is a love affair, and that if you truly love the people, you will never want anybody to be exploited. And the importance of the work in grassroots, and as you're sharing now with traditional leaders. So during this pandemic, how can we reach rural youth, offline youth, grassroots youth, and protect them, who are usually the most vulnerable, who lack access to services, opportunity, and the digital space? This has been a question that came up again and again, but we are not putting measures in place to really reach our majority of the population, which is offline.
I think this is the time when you are key. Your organization is key. My organization is key. This is where networks, women's networks, youth networks are key, because government alone cannot do it. We just need to go flat out and ensure that we are getting everybody on board. We are not going to go out there and give people handouts. We are going to engage them to understand at a time such as this, that the power is in their hands, that they need to rise at this time. In fact, I was reading some of the questions that are coming here on the board, and they want to know, what is it that leaders can do? You as a former leader, how can you encourage younger leaders to become leaders? This is a golden opportunity. You have already emerged as a champion on the continent of Africa, as a leader. Things like this, like the pandemic, happen, but there is a positive side where you see often leaders emerging. Because the young people must stand up. This pandemic is happening during your time. And we are counting on you to take the lead, to go out, to form networks. Governments, yes, but we ourselves, as women's groups, as youth groups, must go out flat out. And governments must have the political will to support civil society. Because I say this because it's the same continent of Africa, where out of the 54 countries, others are enjoying freedoms of association, of speech, but there are other countries where they are not. And this same pandemic is bringing out authoritarian group leadership that is blocking the participation of civil society. So what we need to do is civil society to be fully engaged. And there must be political will on the part of government to realize if they are serious about this pandemic, they need to engage civil society and groups of women and men to go out, chiefs to go out and participate in sensitization of the masses. But finally, to close that question up, I also am concerned that it has been so much resources, financial resources coming into Africa, into African governments for the purposes of fighting the pandemic. Governments need to be accountable. Governments need to be transparent. And the young people, young leadership, civil society need to be alert to ensure that whatever resources are coming into our countries are going to good use.
Citizen accountability. Thank you for answering a question that I was going to ask, which is young people were asking here as well on corruption and how do we hold governments accountable. So I think you addressed that. So I want to ask you the last question, which is, you always say that Africa is not poor. We are rich in our natural resources, that Africa needs trade, not aid. But the world still thinks that Africa needs saving during COVID-19. How should the global community support Africa moving beyond this neo-colonial narrative?
Yes, I have indeed said a lot that Africa is not poor. I'm looking at the resources that we have, the natural resources. Now it is known. African Union engaged former President Mbeki of South Africa to lead an exercise that went out into the President Mbeki led an exercise that went and investigated and found out how we were using our resources, our natural resources on the continent, and found that 70 billion of our resources are leaving Africa every year, going beyond. And sometimes I close my eyes and imagine if all those resources stayed on the continent of Africa, where Africa would have been. So yes, indeed, if you are a leader, you must fall in love with the people, and the people must fall in love with you. And we have countries on this continent of Africa, like Botswana, like Ghana, where you see that the resources they have, like Rwanda, prudently used, properly used, they benefit the masses. I mean, in Botswana, every child can go to school if they want to go to school. I was invited there as a guest, I mean, for trade, for a visit, a state visit, to launch a poverty eradication program. And I asked President Khama, how many people live in poverty? It was only 25%. And so if it is only 25%, because of the resources they have ensured that they reduce all that poverty. So I am saying, we have an opportunity in Africa. We are not poor. But as you say, now we are in the midst of this pandemic. And everybody is rushing around going to get loans on behalf of the people they lead, going to get donations and the grants on behalf of the people they lead. Well and good. But if you are borrowing on behalf of the people for no proper purpose, then it's not fair. Because what I am saying, even in Africa as we know it, is 54 countries. And 54 countries with their own unique situations. So the model that we use in Malawi to fight the COVID-19 is not what South Africa will use. Another country will shut down, another country shut down. For example, South Africa shut down. Malawi went to court. Malawians went to court to say we can't shut down. So we didn't shut down. We didn't shut down, and the total of people dead are 4. The total of people infected are 300. So we are saying each country is unique. And so therefore there must not be copy and paste. The international community must help us at a time such as this to build the capacity. To build the capacity to be prepared. Because between you and me, if we begin to look at COVID-19 country by country, the whole continent of Africa, the total is almost 6,000 only. And when we are looking at Italy, it is 39,000. Some of us are thinking we haven't reached the peak. So this is a window of opportunity for us, for the global community to help us build the community so that when we hit the peak, we are well prepared with our health services, with the ventilators, masks, protective clothes. It is a God-given opportunity for us to build that capacity. Because somebody had predicted that by this month, borders will be lying all over Africa on the roads. But we haven't died that way. But we cannot rule out that it's coming. So the global community must help us build that capacity by indeed giving us those funds. But then our leadership must also use those funds prudently. What I am saying, that doesn't take away the fact that we are a rich continent. We can build our economies, and we can build our economies to an extent that every citizen of our country knows that I am born in this country, and the resources are God-given, and they belong to me too as an ordinary citizen.
Absolutely. And also to produce in Africa, you know, we have a lab now in Senegal producing test kits, so we need to be able to continue self-reliant and produce. So I wanted to end with a call to action, but there are many young women on the chat really insisting that I ask you this question on female leadership. We currently have one woman president in Africa, the president of Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and we are very proud of that. But as the first, woman president of Malawi yourself and a strong advocate for women and girls liberation, let's say, what would you say to young women and girls listening to us right now who dream of occupying their rightful place in society, and despite being affected by COVID-19? Maybe this could be your call to action.
Yeah, our call to action is that we who have gone all the way to leadership, whether it is State House, boardroom, or whatever, we had no role models. We had nobody to assist us. We faced untold misery to get to those positions. And what we didn't discuss, by the way, in Beijing, is how do we stay there? We discussed that we must go home and get into positions of leadership. And we did. We got home and we found our way there. But we didn't discuss is how do we stay there? So my response to your question is that now time has come that it is a moral obligation for those of us who are this age to support younger leaders so that they don't go through what we went through. So, and for us to accelerate that rise to leadership by young women is for us to encourage women to work with them, to make sure that we support them, to form networks, to support one another, to be each other's keeper, to get all the way to the top. And I have said that this should be an agenda item for Beijing Plus 25. We must discuss how we support younger women. But number two, we must also discuss at that conference how we get women to decision-making positions and help them to stay there. Because what we have found, you are worried about having one woman only in Africa. But we have been 5 women. We have done better than the other continents. I mean, there are parts of this world that are still trying to get one woman into State House. But Africa has had 5. But then ask me why they didn't stay in office. What happened? I mean, that is a subject for another day. But
Yes.
there's so much that didn't happen, and that's what we should have done.
Absolutely.
But what I am saying, well, yes, what I'm saying is now that I'm here and I'm happy with where I am. But it is my moral obligation to make sure that younger women get into leadership and that they must learn from the challenges that we have faced. And that when they get into that status, into that board, into that head of that school, that university, it's my responsibility to support you.
Thank you for that commitment. I want to end on this very high note. And young women out there, you have seen Mama Joyce Banda committing to get more young women into power and leadership, because we need to be there to speak for our issues and to take actions that affect our lives. I can't thank you enough, Your Excellency, for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you.
Nice to
Keep
see you.
working.
Stay safe.
Thank you. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, so before we move on to my next guest, I would like to also share another message, a video from UNFPA Executive Director, who have sent us a message.
African Union Envoy, Ms. Aya Chebbi, African youth, activists, and partners of UNFPA, global citizens. We face a crisis unlike any other in our lifetime. The COVID-19 pandemic has spread devastation around the world and threatens to roll back hard-won development gains, including in Africa. There's never been a greater need for African and global solidarity at all levels. Together, as one community, we are uniting across borders to rise to this unprecedented challenge. Under the stewardship of the African Union, governments in the region have shown great leadership, taking measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus and to mitigate its socioeconomic impact. We're also seeing young leaders like you stepping up, mobilizing within your communities to combat misinformation, using your creativity, using your skills to become part of the solution. There's a proverb from Ghana that tells us, one person alone does not constitute a council. Consultation, it's vital. And we applaud this dialogue and the engagement of Africa's youth to tackle this crisis. And I look to you for leadership, your ideas, your inspiration. You not only help us overcome this pandemic, you also play a key role in ensuring that when we rebuild, it is a more equitable future. Together, we have the means, we have the partnerships, and we certainly have the momentum to safeguard the rights of women and girls and young people. And we know from the Nairobi Summit what can be achieved with solidarity and resolve. Even in this new reality, the ICPD agenda continues to show us the way forward. Our march continues forward. Pandemic or not, women and girls cannot afford to wait. I was proud to see so many of you at the summit speak out boldly, demanding accountability, demanding change. The message from Africa's youth was loud and clear. Now is the time for action. Action that will translate commitments into tangible results. Speak to the change you want to see so that we can build a better, more resilient new world. Young people, you are key to collective success. And I look forward to the outcome of these consultations. Adelante, we move forward.
So that was the message. Thank you, Dr. Natalia, for your message. And we continue to march indeed. And now I'd like to warmly welcome someone who has been an advocate and also a friend and partner of Africa, Her Excellency Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland and the chair of the Elders and a champion of climate justice and the youth agenda. How are you?
I'm very well, Aya. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you perfectly.
Good. That's great. It's wonderful to be with you and be with all the young Africans and maybe not so young who are listening in. It's a real pleasure.
So picking up maybe from Dr. Natalia's message of acknowledging youth work and innovation during this pandemic, we see a lot of young people, among whom young environmental activists who have been calling for years for the same demands of climate justice. We know Africa contributes the least to climate change, but yet they hit the hardest by it. How do you think we can advance the advocacy demands and political will amid COVID-19 on the climate agenda?
I think it really is very important, as you are saying, basically, to align the COVID-19 agenda and the climate agenda, because we still have to meet the commitments of the Paris Climate Agreement, the 2030 agenda, as we come out of COVID-19. Otherwise, we won't have a safe future for anyone. And I really do appreciate the young people who are very conscious of this. And I actually think we can learn a lot from what young people are saying at the moment. The elders, and you mentioned I'm now chair following our beloved Kofi Annan. I remember we marched together in Johannesburg. Do you remember that, Aya? Yes. In 2018 for the 100th birthday of Mandela and the 10th anniversary of the elders. And the elders really love this intergenerational dialogue. And if you look, I'd encourage people to go and have a look at our website, theelders.org, because we have a number of blogs now from young people from around the world. We have a great blog, which I'm very glad we have, from Vanessa Nakate from Uganda. You may remember her. She was in Davos with Greta Thunberg and some other young children. And there was a photograph taken, and they cut her out of the photograph and left the 4 white, Greta and the other 3. And she fought back, and she said, "You're cutting out a continent." And I love that spirit. And the interesting thing is there's a blog, just a more recent blog from Jamie Margolin. And what she argues is that the climate movement must unite behind the Black Lives Matter movement, which is very topical today. And I believe that very firmly. I believe that there is a complete link, and it's the necessity to see that link between poverty, inequality, racism, and then being marginalized in some way. Gender, being an indigenous person, being somebody, a refugee, being somebody with disability. And all of those things are exacerbated by COVID-19. I don't like when people try to say it's a great leveler because we're all suffering. No, we're not. We're not all suffering equally at all. And that you know well on the continent of Africa and in different countries. I'm hearing a lot of stories of countries that no longer are receiving the same remittances because those who had jobs elsewhere are not able to send money home because they now also have lost their jobs. And then capital has flown from African countries, and the debt problem is becoming worse. Commodities are not holding their level. So it's like a perfect storm in a way to have COVID-19 at a time when climate was already disproportionately affecting African countries, as I kept saying and talking about climate justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to also, before we move on to another topic on climate change and climate justice in particular, how do we have these leaders act? I mean, you know, the climate justice movement, the young people in Africa have been calling for decades, have been marching, have been, you know, doing amazing work on the ground, but then the leaders are taking a different action. What do we do about that political will to move the agenda?
I found when I had my mandate as Special Envoy for the Secretary General for the Great Lakes in Africa, that I had to deal with 13 heads of state. All of them happened to be men. And I actually found it almost strange to see the undue respect, the sense that these were big men and people could wait hours for them to come into a room. They could be late as anything and they would never apologize. And I don't mean that in a totally negative way. It's just the culture. They're surrounded by advisors. They believe that they have huge wisdom, and they're very hard to influence because they don't take as a total priority that they're there to serve. I never heard the word, "I'm here to serve my people," very often when I talked to those African leaders. It was a different language. And I think we have to break that not just from African leaders, but from autocrats and other leaders everywhere. And there are good African leaders, don't get me wrong, who are working well to serve their people. But the distance between them and ordinary people is too great. And that's an elder speaking truth to power.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, for the climate issue particularly, it's the European leaders and the leaders who are in the global north who we need to hold accountable, right? Because they're the ones, I mean, the Security Council, we don't even have a seat as Africa to decide on issues of Africa as the 5 permanent members. So I think there is also an accountability to European leaders and the superpowers to really deliver, you know, for the globe, to really deliver their mandate for people. And on the Security Council, I want to move to the peace and security agenda, because yes, you served as the special envoy on the Great Lake region. And I want to know from your experience, how do we engage more youth and women in the table of negotiation, in the mediation process, especially now with COVID-19 period where, you know, quarantine, lockdowns and all that, and that really grappled mediation processes and, you know, dialogue as a physical space. So in your experience, what are the best practices?
It's a very, very important question, because we have the important Security Council Resolution 1325 and the other resolutions on sexual violence, etc. And we need to make them very meaningful in mediation in particular. When I was appointed, I was told by then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that I was the highest woman mediator that the UN had appointed. So I was determined to make sure that I reached out to women and young people. I said that from the very beginning. I called the framework that I had a framework of hope. And at the same time, it was very difficult because all the heads of state were men. The power rested mainly with men. I formed a platform of women at grassroots level. I used my great friend Binta Diop, the envoy of the African Commission on Women, Peace and Security. I brought her in to help me. It wasn't easy. It's easier now, I think. I think, you know, gradually women and youth in Africa have been just making their voice heard. And I don't think anyone now would want to be in a situation of trying to mediate a conflict without involving women and young people, because they are the peacemakers. They know the situation on the ground. They know what to do. And they're, you know, very more vocal and determined than ever. And I think this is a really good thing.
Yeah, so my final question before we get your message of solidarity and commitment is on the global stage, and you are a global leader, you're part of different platforms. How do you see us moving forward after COVID-19 into a transformation as a global community, where we see Africa as an equal partner rather than this relationship of donor recipient and North and South, that we move on to equitable, you know, a world where we all respect diversity and we all have to contribute. So after COVID-19, how do you see the global governance system changing and coping with this disruption?
Well, I think it is important, following the awful, slow murder, basically, of George Floyd, that you have a real embracing by a much broader, diverse constituency of Black Lives Matter and around the world. And this is going to have an impact on how we look at our world from the point of view of, you know, what did the Universal Declaration say in Article 1? All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. If only we lived up to that. And so I think we are in a new era, but actually it's going to be difficult coming out of COVID-19 because we're using a lot of the money in the rich countries to rescue them from the worst effects, with furloughing of salaries, a lot of rescue packages, etc. And what we need is to use whatever resources we have with the full intent to come out of COVID-19, in the words of the UN, to build back better, which only means moving towards a much greener and nature-based solutions. Because part of the problem is what we've done to Mother Nature with our loss of biodiversity and our extinction of species. So I'm very clear, and I say this all over the world, I often speak about the layers of climate injustice, but I'm making the point that COVID-19 allows us to reflect on how we will, using the fact that we've understood people power, the collective behavior of protecting us from the virus by accepting lockdown in so many countries, by social distancing, etc. We've listened to the science, the health science, and we know that government matters. And these are lessons to bring into the Build Back Better that has to move in a transformational way. And Africa has to be front and center on that, because you are not only the youngest continent, and with going to be the largest populated continent, but also a continent that is unique to the future, because you have to get this clean energy quickly in solidarity.
So I want to end with your solidarity message, since you have a good transition to that, and also your commitment as a global leader, champion, and advocate for climate justice. What is
my commitment can seem to be a sort of modest one in a way. I have been for the last number of years trying to make space for the voices of young people. So if I'm on a panel and I know there's a young person going to be on that panel, I use my asking power to say, let the young person go first, because almost always the young person goes last on a panel and people have stopped listening almost. So that's one thing. To make sure that in delegations to important conferences, like the climate conferences, young people are included as delegates, so they have their voice. Nobody can speak better for young people than young people. So if we don't let the voices be heard, so I'm calling on my generation, who made so many mistakes on climate and everything else, to allow young people now to have that leadership role. Do you remember what Kofi Annan used to say so often? You are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. Yeah. And I think that encapsulates what the elders want to see, and how much we value an intergenerational dialogue, and how much we feel young people are the actors of now, not just of the future.
Thank you very much for that inspiring commitment from you. I can't thank you enough for joining us for these few minutes. I know you have to jump to another commitment, but thank you for being with us, Your Excellency.
Not at all, Aya. It's a great, great pleasure to have joined you, and good luck with the rest of these wonderful conversations that you're having and getting African youths involved in them. Well done.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Okay, and you. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, so before I move to my last guest, and I really want to thank all of you for staying over these 2 hours to listen to all of our guests and the engagements, and also to sending in your questions. I'm trying to integrate all of the questions and broader questions so we can get as much answers as we can. But I want now to move to a final message from a young person from Libya. One second, let me find that. Yes. And the message will be in Arabic, but there will be subtitle in English, so please follow.
مرحبا، أنا محمد الدبار. كما تعلمون يشهد عالمنا حاليا أزمة فيروس كورونا المستجد، أو الذي تسبب في جائحة كوفيد-19. إن مبادرة إسكات البنادق وأجندة 2063 هي خط دفاعنا الأول في القارة الإفريقية. لقد تسببت جائحة كوفيد-19 في إظهار هشاشة وضعف أنظمتنا في مجابهة الأوبئة والمخاطر. لقد تسببت في إغلاق العديد من المصانع والشركات، كما أنها أثرت على سوق العيش الكريم، بالإضافة إلى أنها تسببت في إغلاق المدارس والجامعات والمؤسسات التعليمية، وكذلك زادت من رفع نسبة الفقر المدقع في القارة الأفريقية بشكل عام. نحن الآن بحاجة ماسة وملحة إلى تضامن عالمي وعاجل بين الدول وبين الأجيال. كذلك نحن بحاجة إلى قيادة بين الدول وبين الأجيال لكي نضمن مستقبل قوي ومزدهر في مجابهة الأوبئة. وشكرا.
So that was Mohammed from Libya. He is one of the 5 African Youth Ambassadors for Peace appointed by the African Union. And now I want to welcome my last guest, last but not least, Her Excellency Graça Machel, founder of the Graça Machel Trust, a former freedom fighter in Mozambique and the country's first Minister of Education. These are just few things among a long biography of decades of long professional and public life, rooted, I think, in international advocacy for women and children's rights, and an inspiration to many young women like myself. So, Mama Machel, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm really very happy to be able, one, to see you and to listen to your very interesting interaction with other leaders and your colleagues. It's an honor to be with you today.
Thank you for being with us. And I want to kick us off with Mohammed's message for silencing the guns in Africa, especially for better future for youth in his country, Libya, but also Africa at large. And the question is, how can civil society actors like Mohammed play a role during COVID-19, which they're already doing on the front line, but how can we boost this collaboration between civil society and governments to collaborate to overcome the crisis?
I think one of the challenges we have had during this period of crisis is connection. Because of the lockdown, many young people cannot, move and meet leaders or in other sectors. And in some cases, they don't even have, the technological capacity to engage as it should be. So my suggestion to you, Aya, is for those areas where you feel very strongly that the post-COVID agenda should not be designed without the participation of young people. Do it exactly as you are doing now. And select some of them by sector, and you selected the heads of states, the business people, the researchers, if you like, or civil society leaders. Engage them directly to be able to express their aspirations, and as you are doing, to ask them to make commitments, because then you can keep them accountable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is a question here from the floor on education, because I think everyone know, you are a global advocate for women and girls, especially vocal on the areas of equity in education. What do you think should government put in place during the pandemic on education and e-learning, as we're all transitioning to e-learning?
It has been depressing to see what is happening to education of our young generations during this crisis. One, because the lockdown literally told kids, young people, and teachers to stay at home. So education was totally disrupted. Then there were efforts to put strategies to continue education online. Now, in our reality on this continent, how many young people have access to online equipment? First, as you know, most of our rural areas, they don't even have electricity, let alone to say now whether they will have a computer or they will have a telephone through which they can have classes online. And in some cases, even teachers are not prepared to continue, to assist their students online. So the disruption is very serious. And I think we have to be really very bold and courageous to say, this is a year which, in my view, it should be for most of kids, it should be simply repeated. Because when children lose 6 weeks, 8 weeks, even more than that, it's hardly possible to get them to catch up. We don't know when, COVID will be over. And when we open schools, we don't know whether we'll have enough time for us to meet all the requirements of the academic year which had been planned. So I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about this because the implications are not for 2020. The implications will remain with us for the next 5-10 years to come. Mm-hmm. So when you ask me what government should do, I agree, when the conditions exist, they can go back to school because that's the best way they can have some kind of education. But we shouldn't be rushing to say the year. was completed. Perhaps we should have a transition period of at least 3 years in which you say 2021, you will meet what you didn't meet in 20, and what you don't meet in 21, you meet it in 22, and then you can go back to a normal situation. But we shouldn't rush to say, because it's convenient for the managers of the system to put children at risk of not meeting the knowledge and the skills which are required by the curriculum.
Thank you for that perspective. It's the first time actually I did a whole webinar on education, and it's the first time I get that perspective of this, you know, we're gonna catch up, you know, make the students catch up instead of really make a feasible timeline for them. And since we have a young person who is joining us, so I'm gonna go forward and give him the floor. And just as an introduction, I know when young Graça got a scholarship to high school in the capital of Mozambique, Maputo, she was the only Black African in a class of 40 white students. So the recent events that are sparked by the death of a Black man attributed to police brutality and systematic racism in the US has also sparked a global conversation on racial justice, but also conversation here on the continent on racism, Afrophobia, and police violence. I want to bring in a young South African, Rigoto Fete, I hope I pronounced it correct, who is an author and commentator and writes about these issues. So he will ask a question on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aya, for having me. And thank you, Mom Michelle, for gracing us with your presence today. I've been thinking a lot around the idea of what racial justice and social justice is on the continent over the past few years, and in particular movements such as in South Africa, Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall, which at the heart of it were not just questioning the nature of how our society is, but the logic of it, the logic that says that if you're Black, you are less than, if you're a woman, you are somehow less than in this society. And one of the tactics that we really tried to encourage in that moment was that we're no longer asking for permission, right, to change things. We're no longer asking for permission from our elders to look at the world and imagine our world differently. But the flashback that we get when we try and push for it, it's quite violent, it's quite visceral, where our elders often don't listen to us in that regard. And what it ends up doing is that, in my opinion, it creates this lost generation, a generation that seemingly is incapable to the eyes of the elders of saving itself, and that in turn imprints on us the belief that we can't save ourselves. So for me, the question is, if we do want to create some sort of social racial justice on our continent and across the world, how do we as young people, in your opinion, stop becoming a lost generation? And whether we should stop asking for permission and just change the society ourselves, regardless of what our elders say. And I would like to hear your opinion on
that. That's a good question. Look, one of the first requirements, if you want to effect a long-standing change, is to be conscious of what you want to change and how big the task of changing, of transformation it is. Because it's not going to be an event, it's going to be a long process, and which is also tackled in different dimensions. Racism, it's extremely entrenched in the minds and the behavior and institutions which are governing our world today. It's not in the US alone, it's not in Africa, it's everywhere. I even say that, you know, one of the biggest challenges our human race is facing today is exactly the issue of racism. To accept that we are all, as Mary Robinson was saying, we are all born free and equal, but to accept one another, to get to a point, you as a Black young man, you can see the humanity and the dignity of a white young man or a white girl. And that girl or that young man see in you also equally the same dignity as human you are. So as you can, it's easy to say, but to get there, it's very, very difficult. But coming to your question, how do we do this? I think we need to strategize better. I did watch the movement Fees Must Fall in South Africa. And I was thrilled to see it happen. But I think in the implementation of that strategy, the way some mistakes which were made in the sense of the methods you have to use to take your voice to be taken not only seriously with credibility, but to be felt as constructive. And mark my word, to be constructive. You don't have to be seen as you are distracting. You have to put yourself in situations where you indicate that you know where to go, you know how hard it is, but you adopt the best methods for that. What undermines fees must fall, in my view, is when violence entered in. When students went and they burned libraries, etc., etc. Then, of course, police was called in, etc., etc. I'm not saying it was all bad. I'm saying because it was your first experience, you know, I think you learn from these issues to do it in much better in the future. Engage institutions with a very clear agenda, using the right methods, and make it sure that you are not going to move back before you have the result of what you are looking for, but do it as it should be without being destructive. This is the first point. The second one is to understand that if racism is so entrenched as we are, you are going to have some steps. You are going to gain them, but it's not anything you are going to change in a short time, because it comes from generations before my generation even, and of course much more than your generation. So you take it like those who approved the Freedom Charter. They said freedom in our lifetime. Where does it mean? It took decades until freedom came. You remember that? So you have to know also that you struggle. It is going to take decades. In fact, it can even outlive you and it be continued by your children, because it's systemic and it has built not only attitudes and behaviors. You have to dismantle institutions. Our case in South Africa is quite clear. We have very good legislation. We have very good, constitution. We have institutions which have been established, but we're still struggling to dismantle racism in the country. So that's the thing I would like, really in South Africa, if you like, sometime we can sit down and we discuss this together to say, how do you strategize? And how do you take your case to be taken seriously, not only seriously, with the credibility it deserves, but in a constructive way, in which you know from both sides it's not going to be easy. So that's the point I would like to make. If I don't know whether I responded clearly to what you are saying.
No, you did.
I think I did.
Yes.
You think so? And yeah. I'm happy for us to continue this debate in time which is convenient for you and other colleagues of yours in a very long process which we can engage one another. Okay?
I will definitely hold you to that.
Absolutely. I'm here. I'm here for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we got this really interesting question from Albert. He's saying there is a lot of dialogue of how the gap between youth and older generation in terms of our views on sexual maternal health. Taboos are not as scared for youth anymore, which some have argued is extremely necessary for new cultural practices. However, in rural areas, the gaps between youth and culture readers is really big. Do you have any strategies or advice for how we can tackle that as movements?
Yes, the Grayson Mitchell Trust and also the Foundation for Community Development, which I established in Mozambique, we do have programs to engage youth themselves, so that they own their rights, and they also are supported to get the right methods of how to use those rights responsibly. But we do also engage adults, not only teachers in schools, but in communities. We have what we call, community dialogues. We bring together, religious leaders, traditional leaders, women's leaders, and those who are influential in different communities. And we begin the dialogue of, reproductive health for young people is a right. Just to introduce the concept that it is a right. Second, to say, whether you like it or not, young people will engage in sex because the world has changed. And because they have to do that, it's important that they have the guidance and the support. One, from schools where they spend much of their time during the day. Second, when they go back home and with the communities. I didn't mention parents in these community dialogues I'm talking about. So it is a long process, but you really need to work both sides in understanding that you can't go without the other. And it is bearing some fruits, particularly when you bring to adults to say, look, if you want to ignore it, the result is that particularly girls, if they have early pregnancy, they will not be able to deliver properly. They die in some cases, and we have issues of fistula. And they have to see the impact of young women or young men in this case who engage in sex without the proper preparation. The consequences, it costs life at the end. Or if it's not costing life, it costs a huge damage to these young women. And adults, they respond to that. If you say it theory only, it is a right. It's very hard for them to see. But they see fistula. They see young people who die. And then you use that to say, that's what we are talking about. In child marriage, the same thing. I mean, you can say 100 times that child marriage is not a good practice. But show the cases of young women who become wives and mothers very early. What happens to their health? It's sometimes what happens to the health of the children they are having. And to say, look, the process, it means that they have to start late to become mothers. And if they have to start late to become mothers, it means marriage has to come late. And what do you do before they become mothers or they become married? School. And you say, when they remain in school to complete at least secondary school, they are grown up enough to be able to make choices. And if they can make choices, you will see, literally, there's no young woman who wants to become a mother at the age of 17. They will choose. So they will be able, to assert their rights because they are conscious, but society also will understand why we need to allow young people to make choices. But, Aya, all this, when it comes to changing mentality and mindset and practices and the norms in society, it's a long process. Don't work in a community and you do 3 or 4 meetings and you believe you have done it. It's a process you have to be prepared to do it at least for 10 years, working with the same communities. It requires consistency, it requires persistence, and it also requires that you allow them to raise concerns because they believe in those practices. Allow them to raise the concerns and you counter-argue with proofs of what is wrong and what happens to their children. They care about their children. They don't want really their children to be, prejudiced. So it's that process which we are engaged in. And we have a program which we are working with the UNFPA, and we are also working with the Bill and Melinda Gates exactly for reproductive health rights for adolescents and young people.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot of interaction in the chat box with your statement, and I see a lot of, women talking about the girl child, and they're also saying, bearing in mind the other marginalization or vulnerabilities, people with disability and people with HIV, AIDS, and so on and so forth. So as you said, this is a conversation needs to continue. And I know we need to wrap up. So I really want to take from you a call, inspiring action to young people, which you always do, but also commitment from you as an African and global leaders who leads in many international platforms and who has, you know, the influence and the power to make sure that the youth agenda is moving forward.
My challenge to young people is, you know, many times you complain that adults and even in institutions, they don't listen to you. And I want to tell you one thing. Power will never be given to you. You have to conquer it. It will never be given to you. So you have to be organized enough. You have to be strategizing. And when you strategize, you define what are the priorities for the first, second, 5 years, so that you have to make progress step by step. So you need to be much more stronger in your organizations, the youth organizations, to strategize and to define exactly with priorities. What are the issues you want to get at the national, at the RECs, in this case, and continentally? And you have to say for the next 3 years, the minimum you want to achieve is this 1, 2, 3 things. You know how women manage to get where they are? Well, you have a few countries now who are having 50%. You know how they did it? They started exactly that. Organize, strategize, and make it mandatory at a national level to say there's a percentage of young people, of women at the time, and that's what you have to do. A percentage of young people who have to be in political parties, a percentage of young people who have to be in government, a percentage of young people who have to be in the legislative stuff. Everywhere you have to define it and you fight for it. In the 54 countries, you hammer that this is what you have to achieve in a certain period of time. So you have to conquer it. And I'm happy in another space to discuss this with you. So we have been coming with this for a long time as women. You'll do it, and you'll do it much quicker now because you have better tools than we had when we started. Now you want me to make a commitment. As you know, I convened with Minds and Graça Machel Trust, the African Youth Network Movement. It's precisely to give you the platform, and young people define, the pillars they want to work in. Each of those pillars have to define exactly the first, the second, and the third step. And we have to get to a point where bringing the national and the regional movement, then we will be able to sit at the African Union, and with your help and other leaders who are at the African Union, to sit in that table. There's no reason why the African Union will meet only with heads of state, and there are no young people speaking there. You have to get to a point where, yes, in your own right, you sit at the summit of African Union and you set up your agenda. But you'll be able to do this if you are organized enough and you listen to the voice of the millions of young people. That gives you credibility. It gives you legitimacy because you're not speaking on behalf of hundreds. You are speaking on behalf of millions. So my commitment is to help you to strengthen this African Youth Network movement so that you're stronger, your voice will be much well organized, much stronger, coming from a very clear strategy. And like me, there are many other adults with white hair like me who are there to support you, but it's your struggle and you'll get there. I have no doubts that you'll do it, and you'll do it in a much shorter time than what we had to do as women's movement.
Thank you for that inspiring call to action and commitment. And indeed, that's why we need this intergenerational dialogues, because we also have to learn from the women movement. And as someone who is part of both the youth and the women movement, I always tell the youth space, there is a lot to learn from the women movement to get there. So this has been really inspiring, and young people who've been commenting all along, they all want your WhatsApp number and they all want to be mentored by you.
They want my WhatsApp number. Ooh, I'm not so sure whether Tahrir will allow me to give my WhatsApp number, because I think I'll be overwhelmed. You and I will agree on how then they get through to me. Yeah. I'm not saying I can't, but it has to be filtered a little bit, because otherwise I will fail to respond, and then you'll be disappointed because Mama doesn't respond to our WhatsApp. But I want young people to know I'm available for you, and we can create much more opportunities for us to interact. My peace of mind will be to feel that whatever is the experience I have accumulated in my more than 70 decades of my age, I can pass it on to you. But more importantly, you'll keep me younger, because I'll listen to you and you'll keep my mind very busy with very creative and innovative ideas. So it's very beneficial for me as well.
Yes, we need your wisdom, and we share our innovation, and that's how we co-lead moving forward. Thank you so much, Mama Gracia Machel, for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was thrilled to see you, and say hi to all your colleagues.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye. You too.
All right, so I come to the end of our series. This was the series of 8 webinars trying to enable youth with information they need during the confinement and lockdown and quarantine phase the last 2 months. And now as we move to the deconfinement, I hope that the purpose of this project has been achieved, which is to create the opportunity for African youth to participate in decision-making process by establishing a model of dialogue and a space of exchange and co-creation between the youth and the decision maker, and especially to secure commitments from the leaders in favor of the youth agenda, so we can hold them accountable to that. So as I said, the result of this whole series will be a roadmap and a strategy moving forward to post-COVID-19. So check out auyouth-envoy.org/webinars, auyouth-envoy.org/webinars to see how this roadmap looks like right now, and we will add the outcomes of today, and then we will publish in a week or so what this final report looks like. I want to really thank all of you who followed the series. Many joined every single Wednesday. I'm very impressed, and tweeted us and even put summaries and blog posts. I see you Animu, I see you Ida, Mary, I see you Sadak Youth Forum, and many others who tweeted, and I thank you all for amplifying the impact of the project. Today we collaborated on the production of the webinar with Legendary, which is an African youth-led creative agency passionate about telling stories that matter, so particularly African stories. Many thanks to the Dio, Rinald, and Raymond for the collab, and thanks to all the young people who are volunteering at my office, the Office of Youth Envoy. I want to thank everyone behind the scene, Neil from Zambia, our comms officer, Raghda from Egypt, Ruth from Uganda, Rotimi from Nigeria, Yasmin from Morocco, Reem from Algeria, Elvis, Victor. It's a really long list. This series has been led by a Pan-African group of passionate, committed young people behind it. So it's a youth-led and driven, but it's also a platform for youth to be on the screen and in the chat box leading the conversation. So we're also collecting all your questions to categorize it in the different thematic areas. Thank you all from across Africa and the world for joining today, and the last 2 months for asking your critical questions. Let's continue the conversation, continue tweeting us, use the hashtag AfricaYouthLed, AfricaYouthLead, and continue to comment. And also, as I said, contribute to the roadmap. I think I covered everything. So let us continue to advocate for social justice, for gender justice, for climate justice, for racial justice, for education for all, for health for all, access to opportunities and technology, and equitable world for all. So continue to organize and unite and play our part as a united African youth and a united continent. And let's step into our power as young people in the spirit of solidarity and Pan-Africanism. This is a wrap. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.